Right, and we should be all updated. Oh, hello there. Hi, my name's Shadowlands. I'm the WoWhead guide writer for Havoc Demon Hunter, and as I was just going over my guide, I was thinking I should probably make a video going over trinkets and various gearing decisions that you might want to run for Mythic Plus and Raid. So, let's get started. Now, first I'm going to start with gearing for Mythic Plus. And with this, I'm going to mostly be focusing on trinkets, crafting, and embellishments. In this video, you'll find my recommendations for what you're going to want for if you just do Mythic Plus, or if you just do Raid, and if you do both, just kind of giving a good idea of what's going to work for both of them. So, first things first, let's start with the trinket recommendations for Mythic Plus. Now, in the trinket tier list on WoWhead, you'll notice in the S tier that you have a bunch of different trinket options here. And you can see that they come from different sources. We have one trinket from Mythic Plus itself, Sephorian Pacemaker. This is your absolute best and run in all scenarios as long as it's at equal or better item level. So if you get a Mythic one of these out of your vault, you'll always equip this. Next, you have trinkets from Raid. In S tier, we only have House of Cards, and really this is the only Raid trinket that you would consider running in Mythic Plus, and there's going to be upsides and downsides to it that I'll go over in a second. And next we have Delve Trinkets. For Delve Trinkets, we have the Mechano Core Amplifier and the Suspicious Energy Drink. Both of these are passive proc trinkets, while Mechano Core gives you an amount of your highest or lowest secondary stat. Energy Drink always gives you Mastery. Both of these are good, however, depending on your character determines what is going to be actually BIS for you. And Energy Drink tends to have the upper hand until you get rid of Circe's Circlet, as the Fathom Dweller's gem does give you an increased value to mastery scaling. That will increase the value of mastery from the energy drink. With Mechano Core, this is typically going to proc on crit, or if it procs your lowest stat, this usually will be versatility, which is good, but it's not quite as good as energy drink, so you will have to sim this on your character. Now, for what I recommend running in Mythic Plus. Typically, House of Cards at the highest item level will be your BIS. This is a trinket that you'll just use on its minute and a half cooldown. It'll overlap an I-beam window. You're not going to save it for meta, as it's a short 15-second duration window anyways, and holding is not going to be a DPS increase versus actually getting the uses in. If you don't have access to a House of Cards on Mythic, I wouldn't recommend running a Heroic one over other Mythic options, or Heroic Delve Trinkets. I don't think it's scaled quite as good as Mechano Core Amplifier or Suspicious Energy Drink are. And if you have access to a Mythic Signet of the Priory, but do not have access to a Mythic House of Cards, Signet of the Priory is just going to perform better due to the item level increase. Much like House of Cards, it's non-use that gives you a bunch of stats. However, this one is a 2-minute cooldown, so you would just line it up into your meta, and you'd use it before your meta, not macroed in, before your burst window from your I-beam prior to Metamorphosis being cast. My preference currently, as I don't have either trinket on Mythic, is to play the Delve Trinkets. So, I have my Pacemaker, which you'll always equip, and then you can run one of either Mechano Core Amplifier or Suspicious Energy Drink. You should always run the one that you have on higher item level if you have the choice of both. Sim out and see which one is better for you, however, these do scale incredibly well off of item level, and if you have one on Hero Track and one on Champ, the Hero Track one should always sim better. As for which of these is going to be better for you, that just depends on your character. As I mentioned, it kind of depends on the value of your stats and whether or not you've replaced your Circe's Circlet, which increases the value of Mastery. Either option is perfectly fine, and I'm a fan of running double passive trinkets, as lining burst damage up into a trinket for Eldrazi Reaver doesn't really feel that good on Havoc, because the burst windows are just not large enough. But you do damage all the time, and the passive trinkets work well. So, for my recommendation for Mythic Plus, it's always run a Pacemaker, and then you can run any of the 4 out of House of Cards, Mechanical Amplifier, Suspicious Energy Drink, and Signet of the Priory, and you should always go with highest item level if that is a consideration out of those 4. I know people ask often about Eye of Kezan and the Mega Magnet, so I'm going to briefly go over why I do not recommend these for Mythic Plus. For Eye of Kezan, when you leave combat, it mentions that the stacks decay rapidly. That is, every 2 seconds that you are out of combat, you will lose a stack, and if you are out of combat for 15 seconds, you will lose any remaining stacks that you have. So, every time that you're going between a pull, you're going to lose multiple stacks, and these stacks can take up to 4 minutes to entirely stack up. As well as that, Eye of Kezan is a mastery-based trinket, not agility. If you look at the stat on it, you'll notice it has 1700 mastery, whereas a mythic level trinket has 5188 agility. That is over triple the agility, while if you go look at the stat weights, mastery is only 20% higher than agility. So without having a significant amount of stacks, you'll be doing, at a baseline, about 3.5% less damage without any stacks if your other trinket you'd be running had no effect. So, it is important for Eye of Kezan to maintain a high stack count to overcome that difference, and in Mythic Plus this simply won't be the case. Many dungeons like Theater of Pain or Motherlode will have multiple times in the dungeon where you will drop your stacks. So, I don't recommend Eye of Kezan for those reasons. There might be a couple dungeons you could make it work in, but I don't think it's worth the hassle or thought, and it's just very punishing to play. As for Mega Magnet, this trinket is almost entirely single target focused. The AoE value, the 10% damage split, is honestly abysmal. Compared to any stat trinket in the game, that is a horrible effect. So, outside of running Mega Magnet for a specific thing, like a burst window on a boss, or for the ads on Azarok and Motherlode, there's no other reason to run Mega Magnet, and I don't recommend it for Mythic Plus. Just stick to the stat trinkets. Those are always scaled better for AoE, and that's really just leaving you with 5 options to run. And next, I'd like to go over raid trinket recommendations. So, for raid, once again, Sephorium Pacemaker. This is just our BIS. This is what you want to run in one of your slots. Your next trinket comes down to a few options. Now, again, if you don't want to run an active trinket, and you just want to run 2 passives, then you have 3 options available to you. Eye of Kezan, which can be pretty good, but does require a longer raid fight. I'll have it written here, and you can pause the video if you'd like to read it, but basically, as raid continues, we're going to get fights shorter and shorter, and the value of this trinket is just going to drop. You also have access to Mechanical Amplifier and Suspicious Energy Drink, so you can run those if you'd like a passive. However, the best trinket that you can use is the same as Mythic Plus, where you would like to use House of Cards in your other slot. Again, used on its 1.5-minute cooldown, not on a 2-minute. And you're just lining it up so it hits an I-beam window. House of Cards is the best that you can run. You can also run Junkmeister's Mega Magnet, which is pretty good for single target, but on fights with a good amount of cleave, it's just going to fall behind. And there's also Signet of the Priory. Signet is not as good as House of Cards, especially in single target, but it does feel easier to use as you're going to line it up with your meta every time. You don't press it with your Metamorphosis cast, it's used with your burst before Metamorphosis, coming with your I-beam, so keep that in mind if you do run it. For other trinkets on the list, if you're in early gearing stages, these are runnable, but I don't recommend running anything else on the list below the SNA Plus tier, especially because they do come from a good variety of content, and you can get 2 of any of them from any content type alone. Next, I'd like to go over crafting. Now, I also have crafting gone over in this guide, but it can be a little bit convoluted and confusing the way that I have it written. So, let me just go over crafting now. I get asked about this often, and basically what I would recommend to do for crafting is to run a sim on your character, which you could do at Raidbots, and you can look up a guide to simming if you haven't done so prior to watching this video, but simply you'll go to Droptimizer, and you would run a sim for Crit Mastery. Will be down here on Professions Epic, and that will sim out your best items to craft. This will not sim embellishments, but just replacing in the slot. And what I recommend you do is actually replace the biggest upgrade that you can get at any given time. Very often people say, oh, but it's not BIS. Why would I craft, why would I craft a neck if it's not BIS? Or why would I craft a ring? It's not BIS. I don't want that. We have a large amount of sparks. At the time of filming this video, I believe we have 5. And as of next week, it should be 6. We're going to keep getting sparked throughout the season. You have a lot of crafts that you can use. Even if the item is not BIS, it's not a bad thing to craft in that slot. So I recommend going with short-term upgrades and what will be a larger upgrade for you at the time, instead of going for what is going to be best in slot for your character in the long run. Because if you do that, you're only going to craft your lowest value pieces, which are the ones that we're going to want to run down 3 item levels, which is typically going to be Bracer and Cloak, or some sort of mix like that, depending on your gear. Instead, craft what's best for you, and that's going to pop up in the sim with what you should craft and upgrade. Now, with that said, the first priority is if you do not have a Mythic Track weapon, you're going to want to craft a weapon for your main hand. Main hand weapon DPS is the most important stat that you can have, and that should be your first priority pretty much on any character you're gearing, not just Havoc Demon Hunter. Crafting a weapon first is going to be your largest upgrade if it's a massive item level upgrade. With weapon though, you cannot use Dawn Thread lining, which means you'd have to craft it with Ascension. However, you can always remove a embellishment later, and I'll go over that as well soon. From there, as well as I mentioned, just going over any crafted pieces that are good upgrades for your character. However, Dawn Thread lining can only go on armor. It cannot go on jewelry, and it cannot go on weapons. So anything in the leatherworking section is something you'll be able to put a Dawn Thread embellishment on. However, it can't go on any of the blacksmithing or jewel crafting upgrades. So that's something to keep in mind as well. With that, that's really just the best way to figure out what you should craft and what you're going to want to use. As for the embellishments, just as I mentioned, you can only use Ascension on your weapon out of the options that are really usable, and there's also Dawn Thread. Now, Ascension is actually slightly stronger for Raid. It does take a long amount of time to stack up. It takes 2.5 minutes to fully stack, but at that point, it gives you 890 of a random secondary stat, and every 15 seconds, the stat that it gives you changes. Whereas Dawn Thread gives you 756 critical strike, but only while you're over 80% health. This typically means, as Havoc, we have about an 85% uptime on it. It's actually an incredibly high uptime, but Ascension does work out to more stats in a typical raid encounter. But every time that you drop Ascendance, you will lose all the stats. So when you drop Combat in Mythic Plus, you're going to lose your Ascendant stacks. That means you're just going to lose all of the secondaries. It's not going to be providing anything for you. And you lose combat all the time in Mythic Plus. This is something that every time you're out of combat for just a few seconds, your stacks are going to end up dropping to 0, and you have to stack it up again and again. So throughout a key, Ascension is going to perform worse, even though it's better in Raid. It's going to be significantly worse in Mythic Plus. Dawn Thread lining is good in both Mythic Plus and in Raid. However, it has even higher uptime than it does in Raid. When you're looking at Mythic Plus, the uptime's usually more like 90% or even higher. So in Mythic Plus, this is just the better option because you're not going to deal with it falling off, and you're getting most of the value that it could possibly provide. However, when I'm talking about these, the gap between embellishments are small. I get asked very often about them, like, hey, should I just recraft? Like, is this why I don't do damage? And the answer is really no. Your embellishments don't matter almost at all. Again, like I mentioned, Dawn Thread's only 756 critical strike. And if we go look at a stat weight sim, and we run the numbers on that, that is not much. when you're looking at it as a percentage, that is less than 1% of our overall DPS that it provides. While the buff is up, it's only 0.96% DPS on my character. So when we're talking about the differences between a good and a bad embellishment, we're talking maybe the difference of 0.2% damage. While it's a relevant gain, it is very minor and it's not going to be game changing for you. So just keep that in mind that it's nothing you need to worry about all too much. And as I mentioned earlier, because you can only use 2 embellishments, if you crafted a piece with an embellishment that you no longer want, like you'd like to remove Ascension from your weapon, I've had it mentioned to me that people didn't know you could do this. There's an embellishing item called Grifta's Heavy Duty Embellishing Powder, and this will, with a recraft, replace the embellishment on your piece. This doesn't count as an embellishment, and it'll replace it to just say +1 sparkle, just letting you know that you've removed an embellish. So you could just take embellishments off of gear with this. It can be purchased in Dornegal, as you can see on the map here, or you could just also check the auction house and people sell it for basically nothing on there as well. As you can see up here, it's about 7 gold when it costs 250 from the vendor. So that's something that you can do as well, just to get rid of embellishments from your gear. That's everything that I wanted to go over in regards to this video. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and I appreciate all the support. Let me know if I missed anything or there was any other questions that you may have in the comments. And other than that, you have yourself a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching.